Friends in the Corner podcast. Stories and topics from around the state of Kentucky. Welcome to Friends in the Corner podcast, everybody. Stories and topics from around the state of Kentucky. Happy to be with you guys for another beautiful episode. I'm your host, Dan Pauly, coming to you from beautiful Lexington, Kentucky. And we've got another wonderful interview on the radar for you guys here today. We're going to be welcoming on Mr. Tony Menechella, my fellow colleague from Castle and Key Distillery. Tony is a fellow tour guide with me at Castle and Key, and beyond just his time with us at Castle and Key, Tony actually has 20 plus years of experience in the spirits industry. He's been a spirits judge, he's a certified specialist in spirits, so he brings a lot of knowledge to the table that we're excited to talk about here today. He's going to talk about where he sees things going in the spirits industry. He talks to us about some of the reviews that he's written over the years. He even talks to us a little bit about the significance of the glass you use to do tastings of your spirits as well. Really cool, informative interview that we're excited to share with you guys here today. And before we get into talking with Tony, I do want to ask you guys, have you guys started following us on social media yet? If not, you probably should to keep up with all the content we have coming out here. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FITC Podcast. That's FITC Podcast. You can also email the show at friendsinthecorner@gmail.com. That's friendsinthecorner, all together lowercase, at gmail.com. And if you want to be a part of the movement that the show is going through right now, be sure to support us on Patreon. Friends in the Corner podcast is fully funded by listeners like you. So if you want to be a part of what we have coming on with this show, be sure to check out patreon.com/FITC podcast for all the different tiers you can join to help support the show. You have a $1 per month, $5 per month, and $10 per month tier you can join. You can join the likes of Tyler Witt and Trevino Woods, who are helping to support the show on a monthly basis, helping to continue the movement and growth of the show as we continue forward into 2020. You can even join our brand new Patreon we have joining this past month. We want to welcome in our next Patreon, Sydney Klinkenbeard. Sydney is actually a friend of mine, and she is actually the one who's unintentionally responsible for the namesake of the show, Friends in the Corner. And if you want to know how Sydney played such a role in naming our show, check out all of our past episodes we've done. We have over 40 plus episodes in our archives, and you can find them all on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Thank you, Sydney, for helping to support the show. Join the likes of Tyler Witt and Trevino Woods. She's going to be getting exclusive content because of her monthly contribution, and she's going to be getting her name called out on each episode of Friends in the Corner podcast as well. You want to be a part of the movement? Check us out, patreon.com/FITC podcast. Without further ado, we're going to be getting into our episode here with Tony today. Tony, as I mentioned, brings a lot of experience here to the table, and it's fun just to scratch his mind on a number of different topics throughout this episode here. So we hope you guys take a chance to enjoy what we have to talk about, the spirits industry, all things bourbon, all things scotch and gin as well, and maybe even learn a thing or two you didn't know before. So let's get right into it here. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Menechella. Here we go. All right, well, we're joined by another special guest here today, Mr. Tony Menechella, meeting down here in Frankfort, Kentucky. Tony, how you doing?
Doing great. How you doing, Dan? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to have you on to the show here. So to give you guys a little bit of background here between me and Tony, Tony is actually a tour guide with me over at Castle and Key. So we've gotten to know each other pretty well over the last couple months since he joined our team here. Tony has also spent some time at Capitol Cellars and a few other spirit shops around the state as well. And Tony, just really excited to have you on and just to get to know you a little bit more and gauge some of the knowledge that you've had over the years you've been in the spirits industry.
Well, I've probably been around or directly involved in the industry in probably 20 years now. I would say 15 15 to 20 of those years of experience with spirits that span the globe. So even though I'm located here in the heart of bourbon country, I really do all spirits. I'm not tied to any particular one. The most difficult or easiest question, however you may want to pertain it or perceive it, I get asked is, what's your favorite drink? And it's really no different than anybody else. What am I in the mood for? Whatever I'm drinking that night, well, that's my favorite drink today.
Awesome. Well, like you're saying, you've been in the industry for almost going on 20 years here or more, get some change. And what was it that really got you first started into this industry?
Really, it was a friend of mine who had turned me on to a scotch that I'd never had before called Lagavulin. And that really got me into going to different whiskey festivals. Back then, they were hosted through the Malt Advocate. Now it's the Whiskey Advocate. They have them in Chicago, San Francisco, New York, now I believe Washington as well. But I attended some early ones in Chicago back around '05. Through that first one, I was introduced to the spirits buyer at Binny's in Chicago. They're a large superstore chain in the Chicago area. And me and him just really started a bond. He helped me evolve my palate and knowledge into whiskey. And from then, it just kept going into next was rum, then brandy, different types of brandy, then world whiskey. And there's just so much out there. And with this boom that we're in now's the perfect time if you have an open mind, because just for whiskey, there's good whiskey being made all over the world right now. And the more you can try, the better off you're going to be, the better off your palate's going to be.
Yeah. And I think when we talk about here where we're at, Kentucky, and even the industry we're in, working at Castle and Key, well, we talk about gin and vodka right now, but we a lot of people, they go to bourbon, and you talk. We were just talking here offline for a minute ago. I was like, well, what's your favorite bourbon? And you said, I really don't drink. I really don't drink bourbon that much. You said you prefer Scotch what you said, whatever the flavor of the day is, right?
It really is, and I mean, occasionally I'll drink a bourbon. Mm-hmm. But to me, as my palate evolved over the years and really over a decade or so now, I needed a little more. And that's nothing against the bourbon industry. It's huge. It's booming everywhere. But I could also make an argument it has somewhat of a limited or narrower flavor profile as opposed to other spirits, if you will, because of the new charred oak, all the corn that's being used. As we mention on our tours, when 65 or so % of your flavor comes from the barrel, well, how much real variance are you going to get from bourbon to bourbon to bourbon? I know there's some, I'm not ignorant, but I could argue that it's limited in some regard because of that.
So what would make, I guess, a spirit, would it be just the distillation process would probably give it more variety?
Some of the legal requirements, mm-hmm. as far as bourbon goes. They have a flavor profile, and because of the requirements, that's what they're basically requiring. When you talk brandy, for instance, you can get a brandy from France, you can get a brandy from Spain, Greece, here in the U.S., and they're going to be not just different, but noticeably different, significantly different. You can get a huge flavor variance profile with Scotch, which I can argue may have the most wide flavor profile of any spirit, certainly any whiskey. Because of their legal definitions, they have more flexibility.
Interesting to see. So what of the scotches that you've had over the years, which ones have stood out to you the most?
Well, I guess I'd have to ask, what do you mean by stood out the most?
Or which I am not a bourbon, as much as we've done these quote unquote bourbon reviews on my shows. I'm not a spirits connoisseur, I guess, to stay. But which ones would you say, if I was walking into a shop right now, which one would you recommend to me?
For just an everyday type scotch, or
see, we're going down some avenues here. So
yeah. Having worked in the retail, both for Liquor Barn and Total Wine, my initial questions are, what do you like? What are you looking for? Is it just an everyday one? Are you new to scotch? Are you looking for a special occasion? Give me a price range. And that's not just for scotch. That's my standard questions, even for a bourbon recommendation.
Okay. So as someone who I consider myself to be more of a bourbon drinker, if I'm wanting to move into scotch, what's a good starter for me?
For me, one that I would recommend would be a Glenmorangie Original, a Glenlivet 12, standard, nice fruity, nice malty notes, typical of a scotch, whereas they're not necessarily going to be a scotch for bourbon drinkers, but it's going to be a scotch. You're going to get an idea, at least, of what a good quality scotch is like to begin with.
We're now there's a few different avenues that you go down here.
We just opened a can of worms.
No, that's awesome. That's what we love to do here on this show. So, and you kind of talked about something, honestly, that really kind of swings back to this, that I thought it was kind of interesting. You talked about how it's taken you this much time to refine your palate. What exactly is it that goes into refining someone's palate? Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit more?
I think it really starts with an open mind. Somebody who likes to try different things, who's open to different things, who's not afraid to go outside of their comfort zone, if you will, think outside of the box, try something outside of the box. Always try something different if the opportunity arises. You're going to be surprised by some things. You're going to find some things, wow, I never thought I'd like that, and here I like that. I've done that to people in blind tastings. You're going to find some things you may have thought you would have liked, and boom, you don't. But to even expand on that, 2 or 3 years from now, revisit some of the things you haven't liked in the past. You may find you suddenly like them as your palate may grow or evolve. Some things you used to like or do like, you may find you don't like as much because of how much your palate may have grown. But the more different spirits, whiskeys that you can get exposed to, you're going to gain in knowledge. That's what it's all about. And knowledge is your palate when it comes to spirits.
Yeah, I think you said something that really kind of hit home with me when I think about it too. The spirits that I drank even 5 years ago, when I have come to revisit them, it tastes completely different to me. And sometimes I like it more, sometimes I like it a little bit less. That's what's kind of interesting about the spirit industry, is just all the different avenues. And I would always wanted to try a few other different things. I honestly, even when we started at Castle and Key, I never cared about gin at all. But we don't. For those of you who haven't come and done a tour with us just yet, and if you do, be sure to ask for Dan or Tony for a tour. You gotta get that plug in. We gotta get tips. But
you know it.
Yeah, but I never had gin, and I mean, I had like Tanqueray and stuff like that, but never really exposed myself until we started trying that. And now I've started collecting a couple of different gins from all over the place just to try them and compare them to our gin.
And some are different. You probably found some other ones that you like.
Mm-hmm.
Before I started at Castle and Key, I was a gin guy. I probably have 10 different ones in the refrigerator that I keep chilled. And if you're hearing this and you do like gin, you should keep it chilled, keep it cold. But gin has come a long ways over the, 15 to 20 years maybe, because of all the botanicals and spices that are available in addition to juniper. For centuries, gins were made for cocktails inadvertently. They started really gaining notice in Europe, but then the British Royal Navy started bringing them to all their colonies on their ships. Back then, quinine would be used to treat malaria. So you've got the gin and tonic, and they didn't even know what it was at the time. Today, we use like lime, lemons for garnishes. It'll add a little bit of citrus on top of it, but sometimes it's just for presentation. Back then, they used citrus to treat scurvy. So everything really had a purpose. But now with all the botanicals and spices that are being used, gin to me, as I describe it, is versatile. A good gin has enough flavor to enjoy on its own, but you can still use it in a cocktail, so you have choices.
So kind of like what I do with my scotch, with besides Castle and Key, we can't give the obvious one away. If I was new in wanting to get into gin, and all I've ever had was Tanqueray, what would you recommend me go out there and try?
Really, a couple choices for what you're going to find on the shelf, and this is at any store, not just here where our gins are at. Bombay Sapphire is a good one that really may have started this trend into gins being versatile. Uncle Val's Botanical is a very good one. The Botanist I like. It's made in Scotland using 27, I think, native botanicals and spices. They're just a couple. Monkey 47's good. It's a little pricey, but it's really damn good. But even New Riff has become popular somewhat with their bourbons. They do a good gin as well that's really citrus forward.
I didn't know they had a gin on the market.
They don't. They had an old one on the market, but their new one that's at the distillery, it's a really good gin.
Awesome. We'll have to go check that out. So, Tony, a lot of amazing information. Obviously, digging into some of your history and the spirits, talking about a lot of knowledge that you've gained from refining your palate over the years, and you're starting to really put that into work in our industry a lot too. We've talked here how you've mentioned that you've judged a few national spirit competitions. And I wanted to kind of dive into that too. So could you tell us a little bit about those competitions and what goes into being a judge for those competitions particularly?
Well, the competitions that I've been honored to be asked to judge in, and to me it is an honor. I've judged in the North American Bourbon and Whiskey Competition, which is held in New Orleans. I physically judged in one. Was invited to another one, but the weather forced it to be canceled. I've judged in the Denver International Spirits Competition, where I believe there are over 400 entries from all over the world. I've judged in the Finger Lakes International Wine and Spirits Competition. But really, if you're going to do an international spirits competition, you have to have a lot of experience with worldwide spirits, not just the spirits themselves. You have to know the production for those spirits as well. Even just the North American Bourbon and Whiskey, a lot of it was bourbon-centric. But you're making quick decisions because it's all double blind. So you're just given a score sheet and say straight rye whiskey, straight bourbon whiskey. You've got to make quick discersions. If it's a bourbon, is it a rye? Is it a wheat-based bourbon? Approximately what age do you think it is? If it's a rye whiskey, is it that 53 to 55% rye? Is it a 90 to 100% rye? What do I think the age is? And these are quick analysis just off the nose of it sometimes.
So you don't, because as you're just saying, you don't know what you're drinking when you see the glass. All you can go off of what's inside of it.
Yep, you're given a description, and
Wow.
That's it. And you, most importantly, maybe even outside of all that, you have to be objective. You're judging what's in the glass and not whether you like it or not. and not everybody can distinguish between that. A good example was in Denver, and this is a pretty nice competition. There were 4 of us at a table. We have a table captain, and we had a straight rye whiskey. I had myself and the captain, who was actually a master distiller. We became friends, and we're both right around 83 to 85 points. Nice rye, nothing outstanding, but a solid rye, if you will. The other 2 people at the table were in the industry. One, I think, was a mixologist, and the other a local distributor. And they're just raving on it. They're like 96 and 98. And we're just looking at each other going, and they weren't budging, and said that outright. And that's a no-no. You don't say I'm not budging. No. So, but there again, you judge not whether you like it or not. And not everybody can distinguish between what's in the glass and, ooh, I really like that. That must be good. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that.
Well, and you were kind of saying, so it sounds like you really have to have a variety to your palate in order to really judge these spirits too, because you don't know if you're having a wheated bourbon or if you're having, like you said, a rye whiskey.
You got to be able to know the difference and then judge the quality of it. For example, in Denver, which truly was an international spirits, we had, and this is just at our table, not for the competition, but we judged ourselves. Vodka, gin, flavored gin, aquavit, brandy, rum, scotch, pre-mixed cocktails. And that's a lot of diversity there. We had a rye as well, so you got to be prepared for whatever might be thrown in front of you. But in addition to being objective, you also have to recognize what your strengths and maybe weaknesses are. For example, myself, I struggle with vodkas. One, I don't drink a lot of vodka, and vodka is really subtle trace flavors, and it's more a mouthfeel than a traditional finish like a whiskey. Mm-hmm. And when we had vodka, I did the best I could, but I'm also going to defer to people who are more experienced with that as well. And I'll alter my score to go in line with what they've come up with. So you really need to check your ego at the door sometimes as well. And not everybody can do that either.
That's just a fact of life right there. So
it really is. Yep, especially in this industry.
It was funny when you were talking about how no one can budge when they're scoring their spirits. I had a flashback to jury duty when no one can agree what the verdict's going to be. So.
Exactly. Yeah, think back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's wrong with this picture?
Well,
but really, just to touch a little more on that, when you see metals and gold and all that, take all that with a grain of salt. The reason we have competitions is for marketing and for those metals. So even though us judges may do our thing, when you're paying $300 or more for a submission to enter these spirits in these competitions, there's a certain how should I phrase it? There's a certain level of medals that are expected to be awarded. So there's nothing preventing the host of the competition from going behind you and altering scores to create more medals. If he doesn't have enough golds, he or she, they may take some high silvers and just make them golds.
So you're paying for praise.
Yeah.
In a way. Well, and money talks. So,
money talks. Yes,
talks.
Indeed.
One thing that we've also talked about before, when you go on to, Tony has a website, you can go check out TonyMenechella.com. And one thing that he actually has on his website is actually some glasses. And you said from one of these competitions you actually got got to know the creators of these glasses, these neat tasters
Yep.
that you use for your spirits. So could you tell us a little bit about those neat tasters?
Well, I could, but how about if I give you an example of them and let you talk about
All right,
it?
that sounds good to me. All right. Well, Tony is off to pour us a few different tastings so we can test these glasses out. But while he's doing that, I want to talk to you guys one-on-one. Amigo to amigo, face to voice. Are you guys enjoying the show so far? You want to find practical ways you can help to support us and the movement we have going on with the show? One of the best things you can actually do is leave us a review online. Go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. The more 5-star reviews we get, the more attention we can get around the internet and the more ears we can get into as well. Reviews help us climb up the list of recommended listens for people all around the state of Kentucky and beyond. So please go leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And if you want to help to financially support the movement as well, check us out on patreon.com/FITC podcast to see different tiers you can join. Join the likes of Tyler Witt, Trevina Woods, and Sydney Klinkenbeard to continue the growth of Friends in the Corner podcast. Links in the description. All right, so for those listening at home, well, what Tony's done is he's given me 2 different pours of spirit. Can I say what we're tasting, or?
Yeah, I won't do this one blind, but this is actually not rare as in limited, but it's a rare cask strength Scotch.
Oh, okay.
And that is what you have, just under 120 proof.
Awesome. And he's given me one of his special neat tasters, and he's also given me one in a Glencairn here to kind of compare and contrast. So where would you like me to start with first? Do you want me to start with the Glencairn here?
Start with what most everybody knows, the Glencairn.
The Glencairn. For those of you who don't know, it's the tulip-shaped glass. You've probably seen a couple different distilleries before, but...
And both glasses have 1.5 ounces poured in them, which is the recommended pour for each glass.
Well, just smelling off the back, it has a lot of sweetness in it.
Some sweetness, a little bit of ethanol, little heat coming out of there.
Yeah. You got to get the noises in for the podcast. Well, you get the heat there. Hang on 1 second. Kind of has like some fruits to it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I get, like these hard fruits from it, or stone fruits. That's what I was going for.
Stone fruits, dried fruits, maybe some candied fruits.
Yeah. Interesting.
But go ahead and nose it out of the neat glass now.
All right.
And see what you think of the nose.
And to kind of give people an idea what this neat taster looks like, it has a large ceramic bowl, or larger bowl at the bottom. It comes a little bit more narrow into the middle, and then it expands back out again. There'll be a picture on my Instagram page if anyone wants to take a look at it. But we're going to do another smell of it. It's not as narrow in this glass as the other, so this may not be right, but I feel like I can smell like cinnamon off of a little bit, like a little bit of a unique spice to it.
It wouldn't surprise me, no.
That came off a lot sweeter that time around than it did in that one. That was got a lot more spice.
A lot of ethanol.
Oh yeah, off the Glencairn. So what makes it so different from the glass? What's the significance of the glass to the tasting?
The flare out at the top of the glass, that allows the ethanol to come out of the glass almost instantly. Whereas with the Glencairn, it's compressing from the middle of that tulip up to the top, so you're getting a more concentration of ethanol right off the bat.
Huh. And that's what makes it like even just a little bit spicier when you go for that first drink, right?
Yeah, it smells a little hot, so it's going to taste hot. Wow. Roughly 70 to 75% of what you taste is still centered around your olfactory system. If it smells hot, it's going to taste a little hot.
Wow.
But with that flare out, that ethanol comes out almost instantly. Go ahead and swirl both glasses. You will get more flavors off of the neat glass instantly without the ethanol. And that's why the neat glass is actually used in just about every major spirits competition.
So you want me to spin around and then take another taste here? Or?
Go ahead and swirl it and just nose it even and see what you get between both glasses, because I've seen a lot of people normally swirl them. Probably a little higher concentration of ethanol.
No, absolutely. Just got a whole nose of it right there.
That's why I shake my head when I see people do that. Go ahead and swirl that one and do that.
Oh, it smells a lot better. So
once again, that ethanol is completely coming out of the rim of that glass.
Yeah. So like I said, I feel like I can smell a little bit of that butterscotch again in there, and just that a little bit more of that more sweetness, like a bit of a candy to it.
A lot more of those fruits without the heat and the alcohol.
Tastes damn good. So I can get behind that. So you personal testimony here too. Is there a certain name for this type of neat glass?
It's actually called a neat glass.
Oh, it's the direct name, the neat glass, the ultimate spirit glass. Science built a better glass. And you sell these on your website, is that right?
Yep, I sell these. I was sold the minute I used them in my first competition. And quite frankly, I won't go back to another glass. And I can honestly say in 20 years of spirits, it is the best glass I've ever used. It's really not even close.
How were you introduced to this glass design?
It was in the first competition I judged in, which was the North American Bourbon and Whiskey competition. But the night before the competition, sitting in the bar in the hotel, I actually got to meet the creator of those glasses, George Manska, and got to talk with him quite a bit that evening. He went and got a couple glasses and let me use them that night. And I was sold. I was sold. Me and him quickly became friends. I didn't just want to be a seller of them, but a retailer for them as well, because I was sold, and it's not even close. And it's the only glass I use for my reviews. At that first competition, I think we did 6, maybe 7 flights of spirits before lunch. And I still had my palate. I still had my nose. Because there's no ethanol. You're not getting nose or olfactory fatigued from the alcohol or the ethanol.
Man, I never realized how much a difference it is with the glass. So to have a one like this, and I mean, I have a ton of Glencairns at home that this is what I drink my spirits in, and now I need to convert.
Well, it's not so much even converting, but this definitely isn't directed at you, but even the biggest mistake I see people make in this industry, they don't know the difference in the glassware and how a spirit's going to react in the glassware. You know what you drink out of at home, but when you go to a bar or a restaurant, you might get served a different glass. Mm-hmm. And you got to know, or should know, how the spirit's going to react in that type of glass. Because you've got a neat glass, you've got a Glencairn, there's a rocks glass. Some are narrower, some are wider.
It was the red Solo cup from my college days.
The ultimate.
Yeah, that shows the test of time.
Yeah. Stories I could tell. That'll be another podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
But Tony, just awesome to kind of hear a little bit more about your background, talking to us through this tasting. And even you were talking about when you do your own tastings, you've talked about some of the reviews you had. And if you ever go to Tony's Instagram at Tony Menechella, he does his own personal reviews for spirits on there of his own profiles and his own tastings as well. So what kind of got you into starting that process with your social media?
Well, for social media, I had used Facebook, and a couple years ago, a friend and I decided to try and start a spirit society, not a bourbon society. And long story short, it ended up being dissolved. But I had a vice president who I brought on. She ran an award-winning whiskey bar down in Baton Rouge, and her name's Brandolyn Tabor, and she is phenomenal and extremely knowledgeable with whiskeys. But she asked me if I used Instagram. I said, not really. And she said, well, you should. So hence why I started using Instagram a lot more as well. But to get behind doing my own reviews, it was really Alan Bishop, who's the master distiller with the Spirits of French Lick. And me and him became quick friends. And during one conversation, he looked at me and said, you ought to be the opposite of what Michael Veach is, because I do all spirits, not just bourbon or rye or whiskey. And I was like, okay.
But you can find about 10 or 15 or plus of those down here where we're at.
Exactly. And really nobody doing honest reviews of multiple types of spirits. There's whiskey ones, there's rum ones, there's cognac ones, but very few who are actually doing world spirits reviews and actually putting them out there for people. So I worked on creating my own review sheet based off of a 100-point system. I do factor price into my reviews, so that is a part of it. But that's really how that all came about. And I'll be glad to share with you what my sheet looks like if you'd like to take a look at one for yourself.
So Tony's brought to me these evaluation forms here for how he reviews his spirits that he reviews online. Tony, did you is this your own form? Did you make this up, or did you get this from somewhere else? Or
no, that's actually a form that I created. I did send it to a fellow judge, Larry Wilcox, who I highly, highly respect and recommend. I asked him to review it. He gave me a couple recommendations for changes, so I gave him credit at the bottom of the sheet. But it's a format. It's similar to a format that's used in the competitions. I just tailored it for what I'm doing.
Wow. This is very in-depth. So it looks like you grade this off of a total of 100. Does that look like?
Yep, a 100-point system broken down into a couple different sections. And I'll be glad to let you go through them if you want, to give the audience an idea of what they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So categories-wise, a couple categories you have is smells, mouthfeel, taste, finish, overall impression, and then that most important one for anyone balling on a budget here, price.
Well, and I really decided on price because, one, I think there's a lot of overpriced, overhyped, overmarketed stuff on the shelves. That just is what it is. But there's a competition I came across in New York, and their judges are actually spirits buyers in the industry, whether bars, restaurants, maybe retail stores. And they factor price into their judging, but their scoring with price is based on, would you pay this amount to bring it into your establishment? So I really took that premise and applied it to what I'm doing. If something is average or right where it should be, it gets what it is. If something is overpriced, then it's going to get dinged a little. And if it's a bargain, it should be rewarded as a bargain.
And then you also carry some different descriptors into each of these categories as well, just to give you an idea where things go. In mouthfeel, you actually talk about first impressions when you first have it. So how important is it for how important is the first impression of a spirit when you're drinking it?
I don't know. As far as importance, I would give it 1 or 2 out of 5. And I don't want to diminish that, but it also is just a first impression. Some of my reviews can take upwards to a half hour, sometimes a little longer, some not quite as long. But a good spirit, as how I like to put it, should speak to you in the glass. As it opens or oxidizes, it should change. You want to look for new flavors. How complex is it? How balanced is it? So you're going to have a first impression, but that can also be a second or third impression as well. Your score may come up a little. It can come down a little as it changes. But that's all it really is a first impression. What do you initially think of it? But 5 or 10 minutes later, that could change.
Yeah, so go and check out all of Tony's reviews on his Facebook and Instagram page at Tony Menechella. But Tony, I know beyond just your own postings on your social media, you do publish a few reviews and a few other articles on the online website, The Whiskey Wash. So could you tell us a little bit about your publishings with Whiskey Wash?
Yeah, and I've been doing that a little over a year now. He had advertised on LinkedIn, I had saw, where he was looking for some guest writers, and I talked to him about it, and I'm like, I know you're the Whiskey Wash, but I do a lot of other things as well. And I agreed, and he agreed to bring me on as a guest writer. But I've done a couple articles on judging back when there were some new proposals being talked about with the TTB as far as the labeling here. I did an article on transparency. I just recently did one on what a new distiller should think about distilling in this day and age with a saturated market with a lot of different products. Think outside of the box. Not to talk too in depth, but this country has a long history of distilling rum, of distilling brandy in this country. So there's things you can distill outside of the box, not just your traditional gin, vodka, bourbon, and rye.
So on Whiskey Wash, it's less about reviews of spirits and more about the industry as a whole that you're reviewing.
Yeah, it's just picking a topic and doing an article on it. We try and keep it to around 750 words, so you really can't go off too much on a really broad topic and just talk forever. But I'm thinking of doing my next one on terroir in spirits. There's been some controversy recently about terroir, mainly in whiskey. Where does it begin? Where does it stop? Is it really there? So I'm going to try and talk about that, but then just all spirits in general.
It's Tony Menechella, everybody. He's got a lot of cool stuff. Be sure to check out his website, TonyMenechella.com. And Tony, I want to say thank you again just for all your time here on the show. Where can my followers find you at on social media or online?
Right now I am on Facebook and I am on Instagram for right now. You'll know you got me. It's me, picture with a lake in the backdrop holding a neat glass. So I do, as Dan mentioned, I do put a lot of my reviews out, but I try and put some other cool stuff out there as well about spirits.
Thank you again for coming on to the show, and I say cheers to you for the future, what we got in the spirits industry.
Oh, absolutely, Dan. Thanks a bunch for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Cheers. All right, and that is it for our interview with Tony Menechella. I want to thank Tony for coming on and sharing a little taste of the knowledge he has for the spirits industry, and more importantly, sharing a little taste of the spirits from his collection as well. If you want to check out everything Tony's got going on, be sure to follow him on Facebook and Instagram at Tony Menechella. Check out his website, www.tonymenechella.com, and check out some of the articles he writes for the Whiskey Wash as well. And of course, be sure to come see me and Tony at Castle and Key Distillery at 4445 McCracken Pike in Frankfurt. I want to thank Tony again for coming out to the show and sharing us his knowledge. And I want to thank you guys for listening to another episode of Friends in the Corner podcast. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FITC Podcast. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. And check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/FITC Podcast as well. But you've listened to another episode of Friends in the Corner Podcast. We'll be back with some more fantastic interviews next month. That's a wrap.